Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. Well, last week was Lifestyle Medicine Week, and we did have one lifestyle medicine doctor on, Dr. Judy Brangman, who kicked the week off. But we thought it was important to continue this discussion of the newest certification in medicine, lifestyle medicine, and we are going to feature an entire week of doctors that you might not have heard of, but they are fabulous nevertheless. See, I mess things up all the time. We were talking about that before because we've got some names today that I've practiced pronouncing, and hopefully I won't botch those as well. But we have a week's worth of amazing lifestyle medicine doctors that are not only board certified in lifestyle medicine, but other specialties as well. And you're going to meet them soon. But we have one of the doctors who's going to introduce all of them because I don't know them yet, and she knows them a little bit better than I do. And her name is Dr. Madhuri Parisetti. Hopefully I didn't botch it too much. She's from Chicago. She herself is a lifestyle medicine doctor. So first I would like to welcome her as sort of the co-host, and then she's going to introduce today's guest, who is an endocrinologist. Hello.
Hi, thank you for having us. So yes, I'm Dr. Madhuri Parisetti. My background includes clinical medicine, public health, research methods, and healthcare policy and management. I received my medical degree, and then I worked as a preventative medicine physician for about 5 years before I started my focus in public health, and I received a Master Public Health and to focus on epidemiology and lifestyle-related disease. So I'm an ethical vegan, and I'm a dedicated animal liberation activist. I volunteered several times with PETA, and I've received an outstanding activist of 2020 with them. So I was very lucky to be connected to a wonderful campaigner in Chicago, Jonathan Horn. So I've been lucky to travel with him to demos. So I've also completed, I'm a graduate of the Dr. T. Colin Campbell Plant-Based Nutrition Certificate. And I got to learn all about lifestyle medicine and connected to these wonderful groups of doctors, lifestyle medicine physicians, I would say in the last 1 year. So I'm just super lucky. And yeah, I just love speaking to crowds about animal liberation, environment. I lead the Chicago Climate Healers chapter. Well, this is Dr. Sailesh Rao's organization, and the DC as well. I co-lead that with my vegan friend, Shankar Balasubramaniam. And yeah, I love animals, I love humans, and I want to focus on lifestyle medicine and treating, focusing on the root cause of disease versus just conventional symptomatic treatment. So that's a bit about me.
Well, I love that. And we don't have a spot for you yourself this week, but we're definitely want to have you on the show so that people can get to know a little bit more about you. But there's a lot of people that are smiling right now that you actually admitted to being an ethical vegan, because a lot of doctors might think that's kind of not cool and, that's not why they became doctors. So we love that you're both.
Thank you. So today I'm just extremely honored to introduce Dr. Mahima Gulati, a highly dedicated lifestyle medicine physician with vast experience. So she is a triple board certified in internal medicine, endocrinology, and lifestyle medicine. It would not be sufficient to describe her accolades in the given amount of time. However, I will try to highlight some of the glittering stars in her galaxy of experience. So Dr. Gulati is a director for a lifestyle endocrinology clinic, which offers team-based care for patients with ongoing group support and resources. In order to deliver evidence-based care, the team specializes in instructing patients with plant-based cooking skills, behavioral changes, setting goals, and building mental and emotional resiliency. Dr. Gulati has a very strong academic career. She's conducted NIH-funded research in obesity during her training. She also holds a Master of Science in Clinical Investigation. She's an assistant professor of Medicine, and she's published research in leading medical journals and contributed to medical literature. And she's also authored several chapters on reproductive hormonal and pituitary disorders in men and women, and the role of lifestyle medicine in them. And also her most recent work includes a chapter on women's infertility, PCOS, and endometriosis in ACLM's textbook. She regularly contributes articles addressing disparities in health outcomes among vulnerable populations of women through lifestyle medicine interventions to ACLM's newsletter. And she's also published on the business of lifestyle medicine and bringing healthier lifestyles to workplaces. She's a passionate public speaker and has delivered numerous lifestyle medicine talks on regional and international platforms. And she's spoken to diverse audiences at a multitude of venues, including churches, libraries, health centers, medical schools, and the Connecticut Academy of Family Physicians, among other prestigious academic institutions. Her areas of interest include reversal of type 2 diabetes, mindfulness and resilience, positive psychology, and happiness science. Dr. Gulati's expertise also lies in coaching and mentorship, building effective leadership models for evoking both individual and systems change, and optimizing lifestyle medicine solutions geared toward cost effectiveness with maximal return on investment. Now I would like to warmly welcome our dear friend, Dr. Mahima Gulati, to speak.
That was a wonderful introduction. Sounds like she's a busy lady with all those accolades. It's so nice to meet you, Dr. Gulati.
Thank you. Thank you, Madhuri, for your extremely generous, magnanimous introduction, and thank you, Chef AJ. It's a real honor and privilege to be here. You're one of our heroes, and I could not be more delighted to be here.
Thank you. I'm so happy that you're an endocrinologist because we get so many questions, especially about thyroid disease with people that are vegan. And can I go off my medicine, or do I have to go on my medicine? And can I eat soy? And can I eat cruciferous? I mean, these questions come up every day. And I'm like, well, I'm hypothyroid and I do all that. So, they need to hear it from a doctor. So thank you, because I love that you're this specialty because we have so many questions. But what would you like to talk about?
So, I think, whatever that would be of interest to audience, type 2 diabetes remission or thyroid disorders and, plant-based diets, or PCOS, which is polycystic ovary syndrome, one of the most common hormonal disorders in women, or anything else that would be of interest, just fertility disorders, or even, hypogonadism in men, etc. So any hormonal disorders that you would like me to talk about, if there's any interest in the audience, any questions that come up.
There's quite a bit of interest. We've even had people send in some questions in advance. I'm just curious what your personal story is with becoming plant-based, but in becoming a lifestyle medicine doctor.
That's wonderful. Actually, it happened to me in the way of burnout, really. So, after having my second son, who was unfortunately a preterm birth, I ended up having what they call placental abruption prematurely. And I couldn't understand it because, I thought I was leading a healthy lifestyle. I was even jogging during pregnancy. I was very stressed out because I used to work full time. But, that was the time that, it was kind of hard for us to have a baby in NICU for almost a month. And then I went back to work part-time, and I was starting to feel a little close to what they call burnout. Burnout is a very sort of a crisis level thing now in many professions, especially healthcare professions. And there's actually a World Health Organization definition about that. So I was working only part-time, and I was trying to, make things happen at home and, trying to exclusively breastfeed, etc. And I wasn't feeling really happy about the kind of work that I was doing. Now in, just to give a little sort of background to what we endocrinologists do, we see people who have complex hormonal disorders, right? So most of the times in the real world, people or patients get referred to an endocrinologist or a specialist once they have had type 2 diabetes for a long time. Not usually at the onset of their condition, but when they have had it for some time and they are starting to get complications, they're on 2 or 3 different oral medications and they're not controlled. So they are referred, basically to start insulin. Or if they've had thyroid condition, Hashimoto's thyroiditis for a long time, for like many years, and they're still suffering. They have tried Armour Thyroid, they have tried brand medication, but they still have certain symptoms like joint pains or brain fog or fatigue. And that's when they are referred to us. So they basically come to us later in the game. And I did not know that with the traditional arsenal of medications, right, like insulin, like just thyroid hormone replacement therapy, that I was actually really addressing their true symptoms or suffering. And that was starting to get to me. So I decided to go to a physician leaders conference, a women physician leaders conference at Harvard. And there I met Dr. Beth Freites, who is the president-elect of American College of Lifestyle Medicine. And she's a real pioneer in lifestyle medicine. And I was actually completely shaken. I was like, what is lifestyle medicine? How come I've never heard of this in like 16, 17 years of my career, my training, my residency, my fellowship, my medical school, and my actual clinical practice? So I decided to kind of like get into it. And that was really the beginning of a lot of unlearning and learning to me. And that's how I came across, plant-based medicine. And I, started basically getting to know people like Dr. Parisetti, Dr. Nathan, and you, and everybody else, all the leaders in the field.
So you weren't plant-based before. You actually changed.
Oh, actually, now that I look back at it, I ate horribly. I ate like every weekend. We would go to the cinema hall and eat Nathan's crinkle fries, and Belgian ice cream, chocolate ice cream. It just, looking at it, and my first son actually ended up getting his first dental cavities at the age of 14 months from all the the sort of processed foods we ate. And back then I really didn't connect the dots together. So this was really a big time education for me, and I was actually sad that I didn't know about this back in my medical school or earlier training.
Right. Diabetes rates have really skyrocketed in India, haven't they?
They have. I think, if you really look at the big cities like New Delhi, or even, cities in South India like Bengaluru, etc., their incidence is like 1 in 5 adults, which is 20% of all population. That's scary, really. And then the remaining people who don't have diabetes have pre-diabetes.
Right. And we know with the COVID pandemic, that's probably not good when they have comorbidities.
That's not, and that's why we have seen all the, the COVID crisis in India. It's really taken a huge toll. I mean, part of the reason is the lack of resources, the lack of oxygen supplies or enough ICU beds or lack of mechanical ventilators, etc. But a large part is also the already pre-existing metabolic challenges that would, really hit when the COVID virus attacks, it actually causes the same pathway of inflammation as metabolic syndrome. So it's already fertile ground for a virus like that to really exert a lot of morbidity and mortality. And then there are challenges in the system, like I'm sure you've heard about things like black fungus or mucormycosis now starting to rear its ugly head because of excessive rates of diabetes, etc. And steroids kind of unmask that. And so there's other comorbid conditions, even tuberculosis or multi-drug resistant bacteria are now starting to pop up because of the the steroids and COVID causing the big crisis there. So it's a very bad situation.
How can we help?
So yes, I'm glad that you asked, and that would be wonderful if some of your listeners, if they are able to help. There are 2 things that I thought about. One is there was a New York Times article in May which said, how can you help India in the COVID crisis? If you just Google New York Times article, they laid out a lot of organizations like Project Hope or PATH or AmeriCares, etc., or United Nations agencies that you can go through and kind of either donate money or any other resources that you think you can volunteer. The other one of my friends, she has a Facebook page. She's actually doing, she has her own organization. It's called Chittoor Kav SOS, which is CHITTOOR ChittoorCovSOS. So it's called Chittoor Cov SOS. And if you just check out her Facebook page, there's a way, you can either donate money or do something else in order for, the rural parts of South India to be able to get, basic things like gloves or masks or sanitizers or oximeters or thermometers, etc. And even a little bit would go a long way because, believe it or not, people in the really remote parts of the country, they don't have even the basics like sanitizers or soaps, etc.
Wow, that's incredible. I think a lot of people don't know that.
And so, yeah, I think, whatever it is, I think even a little bit of, resources, if you have the privilege of, feel free to share and, spread the word.
Great. I know that Dr. Barnard's working a lot with Indian doctors with PCRM, not necessarily on the COVID thing, but just in general on becoming plant-based. I was watching some of those classes. They're fabulous.
They are. And he's such a wonderful resource. And also, the amount of research that he has done about, just basically disproving certain myths like, vegan diet versus, the American Diabetes Association low carb diet or the Mediterranean diet, or how, the afterburn from a low fat whole food plant-based diet can be actually quite substantial, etc. So his research is also really highly regarded in the endocrine circles in terms of, dispelling some of the myths around plant-based diets.
Well, speaking of myths around plant-based diet, there's a lot of myths around type 2 diabetes. At least in the United States, people believe that it's caused by sugar when we know that that's not the cause. It's the fat, the high fat foods, whether they're animal products or not. Can you kind of dispel some of those myths? Because I'm guessing even you have patients that come to you that still believe that, because we know there's doctors that still believe that.
That is true. And so this is a very, important question. And I think you're completely right in order to, villainize sugar. And some of that, is well placed if you're talking about sugar sweetened beverages or things like candies or desserts, processed foods, etc. That obviously is a big villain because, it's, very harmful foods in terms of lacking fiber and, really having harmful additives, etc. But people don't understand the role of bad fats, saturated fats, especially animal fats, and how it can really be implicated in the genesis of or the pathogenesis of type 2 diabetes. Because what happens is if we eat excessive, harmful fats in the form of, let's say, red meats or processed meats, they tend to really cause the excessive accumulation of, free fatty acids or toxic fat metabolites in our bloodstream, and they have to be detoxified by the liver. And if we really saturate the liver's capacity to get rid of these harmful free fatty acids, then it's going to start basically malfunctioning. There will be what we call hepatic steatosis, which is, accumulation of fat globules in the normal liver cells or hepatocytes. And once the liver has been overwhelmed or its capacity to work has been overburdened, it's going to start transporting these VLDLs, the very low density lipoproteins, the chylomicrons, etc. molecules to the rest of the body. And now we're going to start depositing fat in places it should not go to, like pancreas, like other places in the viscera, like even the heart's muscle, right? So when we start depositing fat in our pancreatic cells, especially the cells of the pancreas that make insulin called beta cells, they start to become overwhelmed and they can no longer keep up with the insulin production. And so that's when we really start developing type 2 diabetes. I think this is a simplified mechanism. There are more nuances to it. But we get diabetes when our insulin production can no longer keep up with the amount of fuel that we are ingesting. And that happens because our cells have deposited fat in places that they should not be. And the other thing that these fats do is they don't let our body cells respond to the insulin, which, it's considered the primary insult. It's called insulin resistance. So, insulin actually works on our body cells by asking the glucose to get in. It's kind of like the key that opens the door. So unless the insulin is there, glucose is not going to be enter our muscle cells or our, kidney cells or our brain cells, right? And the fat deposition that has occurred in these different places like the liver or the muscle that's going to prevent these glucose receptors from opening. So the insulin is there. There's actually too much insulin circulating in the blood in the initial parts. Later on, the insulin production kind of gives away. But in the beginning, we have hyperinsulinemia. And so in these cases, the receptors are just not responding to the insulin, and that's called insulin resistance. And that again is because of toxic ceramides, etc., fatty acid metabolites that have deposited in these cells. So saturated fats, especially the ones that come from animal sources, red meats, processed meats, oils, even vegetable oils, they're all very harmful if taken in excess, right? So.
And people don't understand this. And then what happens often is they have type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance. They go on a high carb, meaning complex carb diet, low fat, but then they say, well, my blood sugar goes up. See, I can't eat carbs. And so unless they're working with a doctor, they give up.
That's right. That's right. And, some of this is, I think, there's a lot of misconception out there. And you're right. Not even doctors might know about there are actually lots of doctors that, advocate low carb diets. It's
on the keto diet, which is like terrible. I mean, for the planet, for the animals, for their long-term health. It may help their numbers in the short term, but that doesn't help them in the long term.
There is a lot of misinformation. I don't know if this is industry generated. There's a lot of education gaps. That's exactly right. But in general, there is consensus that, if we are more plant predominant or plant-based diets, those are definitely more helpful for individuals' health and population's health. And there are, problems with animal-based ketogenic diets, like increase in bad cholesterol or LDL, or, we don't know what the implications are on overall inflammation. I think I was reading a very interesting study yesterday that said, if women, reproductive aged women, if they were on ketogenic diets, there was and again, this was not a prospective study, but there was a 30% higher risk of birth defects, neural tube defects in women who got pregnant on low carb diets. So again, this was just one study, and this was, it may have had confounding factors because it was not prospective like a trial, but still there are some risks of doing animal-based ketogenic diets, and, not everybody knows that. And so, complex carbs are not the enemy. I think it's more like, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Yes, we have to get rid of the sugar sweetened beverages. Yes, we have to get rid of the, the fruit juices and, the sugary desserts. But that doesn't mean the complex carbs like sweet potatoes or beans or squashes, etc., are harmful. Actually, those are really the cornerstone of our health, and they never cause diabetes. Fruits don't cause diabetes. So, people should not give up those carbs as part of a, like a low carb diet.
That's what they do. It's so sad because it doesn't sound like it would be very satisfying to live a low carb life.
They do that. Actually, I had a patient who had been told by, this was like a big, this is a program, a weight loss program. And they had given her like this big sort of menu plan of what she could eat. So she could eat eggs for morning with like a, like bacon or sausage or something. And she could eat like steak for dinner, etc. But, what was told to her is that she could not have high sugar vegetables like carrots. So carrots were not part of that plan of weight loss or, that diabetes avoiding diet, because it's got a little bit too much carbs.
Can these patients or people, even if they don't have diabetes, really stick to these diets long term when we are carbohydrate burning machines? How can you live without grains and beans and squashes and potatoes and sweet potatoes and fruit? It just seems ridiculous.
So, the long-term adherence for ketogenic diets is extremely, extremely low. And that's, like, this is something that even experts who truly believe in the efficacy of ketogenic diets, they admit to that, sticking to ketogenic diet long-term is practically very, very difficult. So, yeah. And, I think Walter Long or somebody said that you don't have a lot of centenarians who have, done ketogenic diet for a long time in their life, right? You don't see these populations that have been living a very long, healthy life, eating ketogenic diets long-term. That's just not something that we have seen. And ketogenic diets are very like a relatively novel phenomenon. So we don't know what the long-term risks from this are, but it seems to be very unfeasible to stick with long-term.
And some people are now doing a plant-based version of the ketogenic diet,
which I think is a lot better than animal-based keto. And, there's possibly a role for that. But again, sticking to that, I mean, it's super restrictive. I mean, there's really a very, very low amount of or diversity of foods that you can eat. So, I mean, if you want to do it short term, yes, be my guest. But, I don't think this is something sustainable long term. And you don't need to. I mean, I don't know what is the data on that is. So like, this is a relatively recent phenomenon to do like a ketotarian or a plant-based keto diet. So we don't know exactly, what this translates into any kind of nutritional deficiencies long term. But the bottom line is, the human race over like millennia, not just, centuries, millennia has evolved on eating, complex carbs. I mean, what would human civilization be if we did not have whole grains and, tubers and, potatoes? I mean, this is what human civilizations were raised on, right? So I don't see the merit of, not using these as the foundation of our a healthy, nutritious, balanced diet for, most of us.
Yeah. That's something. Do most of your patients come to you, because I know you're triple board certified in internal medicine, endocrinology, and lifestyle medicine. Do they come to you primarily as an endocrinologist, and then you kind of start talking about lifestyle medicine with them, or do they seek you out because they're looking for a lifestyle medicine doctor and they want a different approach?
It's actually both. So, before I became lifestyle medicine, now I've been lifestyle medicine certified for quite some time, and I actually founded and now direct the lifestyle endocrine clinic in my organization. So the doctors and the community basically knows that this is what I do, and there are patients who seek me for that. But also endocrine, I had done like a lot of work on thyroid. My niche area was thyroid and PCOS, and it still is. So patients seek me for that, and I find it to be very, like the thing that makes my heart sing. The perfect marriage between lifestyle medicine and thyroid disorders or endocrine disorders. So a lot of the patients that come to my practice have pre-existing endocrine disorders, especially thyroid or insulin resistance, etc. So I'm able to address a lot of these things with sometimes pharmacotherapy, sometimes drug, but lifestyle is always something that's discussed.
Great. That's wonderful. Would you say that most of the patients that you see that have type 2 diabetes also have excess weight to deal with?
Most of them, but there are certain ethnicities and there are certain individuals, even among the traditional Caucasian ethnicity, who don't have overweight or obesity, and they are what we call the lean type 2 diabetics. So there recently was a study in the Lancet. It came from the UK, and they studied a cohort of 1.5 million people, and they had almost 100,000 people who developed type 2 diabetes, and they were specifically looking for their body mass index or their BMI. And it turned out if you consider a BMI of 30, right, that 30 is considered the obese BMI as per the most guidelines, right? So if you consider a BMI of 30 to be a high risk for type 2 diabetes in Caucasians, the corresponding high risk BMI for like other ethnicities, like South Asians, which is my ethnicity, would be 23.9, which is much lower. 23.9 is not even considered overweight by Caucasian standards, right? And East Asians, which is people from China or Japan, their BMI would be 26.6. Again, that's considered overweight, not obese by the traditional standards, right? So East Asians may have type 2 diabetes at a lower BMI. For Black populations, it might be 28. So all of these other ethnicities can actually be at a very high risk for type 2 diabetes, notably Asians, at a much lower BMI. And that might be because, they may have, so the way that we store fat in our subcutaneous, like our body fat versus our visceral fat, which is, the fat in our livers and the omentum, the organs around our intestines, right? That may differ. So South Asians may start depositing this bad fat in our livers, in our pancreases at a much lower BMI. That's one reason. The other reason may be that they have a low muscle mass to begin with. So, for a BMI of like 20, a South Asian may have a much lower muscle mass and a much more higher, body fat mass compared with a Caucasian. And the third thing might be that their pancreases just might be small. They may not have enough beta cell reserve to, be able to withstand like a lot of injury from calorie excess or processed food excess. And this is what's happening sadly in places in South Asia, like India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, that there's a lot of westernization of diet. There's a lot of oil-rich food. These countries are predominantly vegetarian, but there's a lot of processed foods. There's a lot of dairy. Everything is made with dairy. So instead of like adding oil to the vegetables, we add vegetables to the oils. And so there is a lot of, unfortunately, bad food practices have taken over, and that really has resulted in type 2 pandemic, really, at a much lower BMI. You don't have to be, in fact, half of or 40% of Asians would actually not be considered overweight at all, and they would have type 2 diabetes.
That's incredible. And I wonder who the person is that got oil to be so popular. Because if you look back historically, it wasn't food that people ate. I mean, it was used for lamps and, in Jerusalem, and it was something that the Olympic athletes in Greece adorned their body with. But it's relatively recent in the timeline of human history that people started ingesting oil. You can't make it yourself. It doesn't exist in nature. And yet now people think, whether they have diabetes or not, that it's the holy grail of foods, and that we need fat, but not from oil.
I have a few hypotheses, and maybe I'm wrong. One of the hypotheses is, of course, that that there is some commercial push, like the olive oil industry or the dairy industry promotes butter or ghee, etc. Right? Because they have vested interests. The other hypothesis that I have is that if you really look at the outcomes, the health outcomes, one of the big ones is that people who have more economic sort of financial health, they tend to do better with their health outcomes. They would obviously live longer. If you go back just, like maybe less than 100 years, right? In the 1960s and the 1950s, the people who would have lived longer would have been people of money, people of resources. And those were the only people who could afford oils, right? Or who could afford, like rich fats like ghee and butter. So obviously these people lived longer. And so, maybe there was a correlation that, that ghee and oil and butter is associated, it leads to longevity, or it leads to good health, because the people who consume this are living long, but the rich used to consume it back then. So maybe that's another reason it became like an association thing, sort of a rich thing. Like right now in India, a lot of celebrities, movie stars, they promote ghee, and they're the only ones who can afford ghee. Yeah, like the poor people on the streets cannot afford it. It's very expensive. So obviously it becomes a status symbol, right? And maybe that's where oil gets its clout from.
Yep. So many people, even watching today, and myself included, we're vegan. I've been vegan for 44 years, and yet we still have hypothyroidism. A lot of it is Hashimoto's. That is a very, very prevalent disease among people even that aren't vegan. Why? Why all the hormonal disruption lately? Or maybe it's always been that way. We're just noticing it more.
No, I think there is a real trend towards increase in hypothyroidism. And, again, I had a lot of insights into it, and I think possibly all of them are contributing. Initially, I used to believe this was like the hygiene hypothesis, that we live in a very sanitized country, and, so we don't have enough exposure to like microorganisms or infections. And so, there is a rise in autoimmunity, and thyroid is a very easy organ to attack. And 1 in 10 young women, or women of all ages around menopause, around pregnancy, they'll all develop thyroid disorders, because the immune system malfunctions because it just hasn't been exposed to enough pathogens. I don't think that's correct. I think the other more common culprits are, and then I believe for a time that there is a lot of stress now. People are not sleeping. People are inundated with professional work and work at home, etc. But then if I really think about it, stress has always been part of human civilization. So maybe that's not correct either. I think a lot of this is our inflammatory diets, our westernized diets. And I really think the rise in autoimmune disorders has to do with these, these fast food culture, these inflammogenic diets that cause, low-grade metaflammation, the combination of metabolic syndrome and inflammation. And so I think that has led to especially, dairy and the hormones in it, or, in general, animal products and the antibiotics that we treat our animals with. All of that, I think, is contributing to the rise in autoimmunity. So that's, again, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, one of the common ones. And also other autoimmune diseases like type 1 diabetes is rising, celiac disease is rising, rheumatoid arthritis is rising. So a lot of other autoimmune conditions. And last, but actually very importantly, also EDCs, or endocrine disrupting chemicals, also called hormonal disruptors. And, there's a lot of this. I mean, it really disturbs me how much, exposure we have constantly, whether it's, plastics or personal use products. They are ubiquitous. They are in everything, anything that we touch or use. Phthalates, parabens, atrazine, pesticides. So it's really kind of difficult to get away from them. And I wonder if that has led to a rise, like a skyrocketing of autoimmunity.
Yeah, we didn't used to have, there was a point where nobody even knew what an endocrine disruptor was.
That's right. I mean, I think it was in 1990s. I think there was a big conference called Wing Spread Conference in Wisconsin, in Racine. That's where they first actually defined endocrine disrupting chemicals. Yeah, it's a real concern. And, it's true that women are now achieving puberty at a very young age. The age of attainment of puberty has gone down substantially. People at Endocrine Society, the experts, they believe that this may have a lot to do with EDCs. That the sperm count in men has gone down substantially in the last few decades. Our current generation, they don't have the type of fertility that our grandfathers had. Again, that may have to do with EDCs. And there's a lot more: insulin resistance, obesity. A lot of these may have, their genesis in EDCs as well.
You talk about the age of puberty going down, that there's a lot of ramifications of that. I mean, when physical maturity precedes psychological maturity, girls can get pregnant at a younger age. That cannot be good. Do you think dairy plays a role in this? The hormones that when people have dairy, they're ingesting hormones from the antibiotics and the hormones that are given to the cow. So could that play a role in the decreasing age of puberty? Because I know, like, in the natural world, aren't women supposed to reach menarche at like 15 to 19? And, I got it at 11, which was way too early. But now, I mean, I've read of girls as young as 6. That's too young.
Yeah. No, I think there is real interest in finding out. There are some studies that, attribute young onset puberty to ubiquitous use of, dairy. And, these things like cheese pizzas at every birthday party, or, chocolate milk, etc. They were not present just in, a generation ago. In my generation, we never had this type of exposures. So there is a real body of literature that associates. I don't know if it has been proven conclusively that widespread use of dairy might be implicated in early onset puberty or precocious puberty, even in girls. But there's a lot of interest in that these mammalian estrogens, the dairy hormones specifically, may have a big role to play in that. So yeah, I agree. I mean, unless we know better, maybe just because there is some smoke, maybe we should avoid overdo. I mean, ideally be plant-based, but if you can, then please, like, really avoid at least the processed dairy, like, the cheeses that come in those plastic packets, the American cheese slices, or have real cheese if you're going to have, and really moderate it. Make sure that you're not maybe overdoing. Maybe don't do more than 2 servings a day, even though the USDA guidelines, some reason they still have dairy as part of a healthy diet for kids and for adults. So yeah, I would recommend, unless we know better, maybe we should be cautious about inundating our kids with dairy.
Yeah, well, there are some guests I've had on the show, like Dr. Milton Mills, that say the dietary guidelines are racially biased, because there's a lot of populations that, like myself, Jewish, African Americans, that cannot even digest dairy, and to make it part of a guideline is ludicrous.
That's exactly right. Actually, this is the same thing that I was listening to a talk by Brenda Davis today. This is exactly that. She said that 70% of our adult population is actually lactose intolerant. And, in certain ethnicities like South Asian, it might be more like 80% or higher. So yeah, just making it part of the guidelines and having 3 servings a day is, it's obviously, there might be industry conflicts of interest there.
Right. So it's kind of split with the audience watching live, wanting you to talk about thyroid disease and PCOS. So please feel free to talk about either or both. I think what people want to know, without asking questions necessarily, is can they reverse these diseases if they just go on a plant-based diet? Can they not go on medicine? If they're on medicine, can they get off medicine? That's my guess, is what they want to know, is how important really is diet to these diseases?
Excellent. Yeah, that's an excellent question. Let me start with PCOS. So PCOS is the commonest hormonal disorder in young women. It really is, although I'm afraid that type 2 diabetes might become the commonest hormonal disorder in young reproductive aged women, which is going to be a catastrophe. But it's really more common than we would think, and it's actually very underdiagnosed. It takes on an average 2 to 3 years for a woman to even be diagnosed with it. But it's defined as a disorder in a woman's menstrual cyclicity or her menstrual regularity. So if a woman is not getting menstruation regularly, which is defined as every month, every 25 to 35 days, she may have her individual sort of biological clock. If she's not getting these menstrual periods regularly every month, that's one criterion. And the other criterion is that there are signs or some hints of excessive testosterone in her blood, like facial hair or body hair that she has to shave, or there is, acne or even male pattern balding in certain cases. Or if, she decides to get her blood work checked, that there is indeed excessive testosterone in her blood. So these two things together are what we define as PCOS. And, you have to go to your PCP or your endocrinologist or your gynecologist to make sure that you don't suffer from any other disorder, because there can be certain other disorders that can mimic PCOS, like Cushing syndrome or congenital adrenal hyperplasia, etc. Or you may have irregular menstrual cycles from, underlying thyroid disorder or prolactin disorders that you don't know about. So it's definitely something that you should go to your physician and get workup for. Some women may also have what we call tiny, like really small, less than a centimeter, multiple cysts on her, both right and left ovary. So that can also be a hint towards polycystic ovary. That's why it's called polycystic ovary. And it's essentially characterized by insulin resistance, which is the same thing that causes type 2 diabetes. And there are, there are people who are born with like a genetic predisposition. If your mom had it or your sisters have it, there's a much higher risk that you will get it compared with like somebody who doesn't have that family predisposition. Can you reverse it? We don't know. There's no official scientific definition of reversing PCOS, but you can absolutely, really treat a lot of these PCOS symptoms by addressing lifestyle. Actually, lifestyle medicine is like the number 1, 2, and 3 when it comes to PCOS, just like it is for diabetes. In our office, we call diabetes diabetes. So similarly, PCOS is the literature on PCOS and lifestyle medicine is abounding. It's abundant. And, there's no drug that is as effective as lifestyle medicine. So I have so many patients who have, gone on to do weight loss by eating healthy, eliminating processed foods, and they have been able to get some amount of regularity in their menstrual cycles. Their testosterone levels have gone down. They don't need the drugs like spironolactone for their facial hair anymore. They're able to conceive children naturally. They are able to have their liver enzymes come down. Their body fat obviously comes down. Their sugars come down. Their insulin levels come down. So yes, you can totally sort of treat PCOS in the lack of like a scientific organizational definition of remission. Like we know what causes remission of diabetes. There's a definition for remission of diabetes, but there's no definition for remission of PCOS. So I can't tell our audience if there is a reversal of PCOS, but you can absolutely manage it. You can absolutely take care of it and, be as healthy as anyone else and have babies and, just have a healthy sexual function. Nice. So that's PCOS. I'm sorry, I don't want to go on about thyroid and this, there might be more questions. I don't want to.
Have you ever heard of people using water fasting with PCOS?
I personally in my practice have not, but I can see that as a very, viable solution for decreasing some of the insulin resistance. They can totally do that if they are doing it, right, after that. Water fasting, obviously, if it doesn't generate, like some sort of, you still have to watch what happens in between the fasts. So you want to be on a very healthy whole food plant-based diet in between the fasts, because the fast itself, it's followed by something that would bring back the injury again. Then that doesn't make sense. But in the context of a healthy diet, a fast is actually very good.
Great. Susan actually wrote in a question for you, and she said, is it safe to remedy hormone deficiencies in older women? I read the possible side effects of Vagifem tablets, and it was a bit scary.
So again, this is, something that they should check with their individual physician. I can give you just general guidelines about what are the pros and cons of hormone replacement therapy. In general, if you're a young menopausal woman, as in you just had menopause and you're in your 50s, early 50s, or even late 50s, it may be okay to take hormone replacement therapy. It might be safe, especially if you suffer from very disabling vasomotor symptoms, which are, really bad hot flashes that, don't let you sleep at night. In those circumstances, I think taking hormone replacement therapy would be actually good for your health. And then there are certain, benefits from hormone replacement therapy, like there is potentially a signal towards decreasing the risk of dementia earlier in life, and maybe even helping with things like osteoporosis. So in those circumstances, hormone replacement therapy may be helpful. The concern is if somebody is over the age of 60 and, from like, let's say age 52 till 60, they did not take any hormones. And then they start newly on hormones in their early 60s or mid 60s. That was, the demographic of Women's Health Initiative, which was a big trial that, kind of showed women hormone replacement therapy in a bad light. It turns out the women in that trial were on an average 62. And at that age, taking hormone replacement therapy may be a little bit controversial. So if you've not had it for 10 years and then you expose your body to estrogen after 10 years of like lack of estrogen, that can actually be troublesome in terms of cardiac effects or risk for breast cancer or risk for stroke, etc.
Great. I listened to a wonderful presentation you did on Dr. AJ Shah's show. And it was one thing you said, and I'm not a doctor, but tell me if I heard this correctly, that when it comes to hypothyroidism, if it's caught early and it's not too bad, people might be able to avoid going on medication. But once they've been on it for a discernible amount of time, probably not, even with the best plant-based diet.
That might be true. I'll tell you, unlike PCOS and unlike diabetes, the literature on lifestyle and what impact it has on thyroid is scarce. There's a true paucity. And I really hope that, science and researchers in the future would kind of look at that deficiency, because I think our lifestyle really plays a huge role in our thyroid health. So there's not a lot of good scientific studies that talk about, how does our lifestyle impact our risk of getting thyroid cancer or thyroid, like Graves' disease or Hashimoto's, etc. But in general, yes, if somebody has been on levothyroxine or thyroid hormone replacement for years and years, for decades, there is a chance that their actual gland may be atrophied. The follicular epithelial cells might be shrunken, and they may no longer produce actual thyroid hormone if we stop it. Whereas if somebody just got diagnosed and their TSH levels are minimally high, like 5 or 6, certainly less than 10, and they are committed to doing all the the plant-based diet and making sure they're getting enough selenium or getting enough phytonutrients and nutrients of concern when it comes to thyroid, they might actually be able to get their TSH back down to less than 3 and really avoid having to go on thyroid hormone replacement.
What about what patients are often told when they have hypothyroidism? No soy, no gluten, no cruciferous vegetables.
So that's again a nuanced answer. Soy is, I think, the concern comes from the isoflavones, that they might actually interfere with the thyroid peroxidase function, the enzyme that actually causes the synthesis of thyroid hormone from thyroglobulin protein. And these isoflavones may block the function of that enzyme. So in moderation, soy should be okay. And if somebody is already on artificial thyroid hormone, on levothyroxine, then, it doesn't matter. If they're taking levothyroxine, they should be able to eat soy. There were some studies that express concern if somebody has what they call mild hypothyroidism and they're not on thyroid hormone. If you give them excessive soy, and by excessive soy, I mean like gallons and gallons of soy milk, or, eating a lot of processed soy, which is, soy sauce or, textured soy proteins, etc., that may or may not affect their, goitrogenesis, their ability to have enough thyroid function. So again, in moderation, if you're having like less than or equal to 2 servings of soy, ideally, organic unprocessed soy like edamame or miso, or, the whole soybeans, I don't think it should be a problem. And that, that study about mild hypothyroidism and the impact on their thyroid function, it's not really very, it wasn't reproduced elsewhere. So I think in moderation, you should be okay if you have just borderline hypothyroidism. Now, as concerns cruciferous vegetables, I think they are actually really healthy and everybody should consume them, like Dr. Greger's Daily Dozen, and you have always, belabored this to your listeners to make sure that we are all eating, healthy cruciferous vegetables, cabbage, kale, arugula, etc., because they are really good in terms of their anti-cancer properties and other health-giving properties, right? The concern comes from thiocyanates, a compound in them that can actually interfere with the functioning of the thyroid hormone. And so again, if somebody is, eating in moderation, and moderation can be anything, even if they're having up to 3 or 4 servings of cruciferous vegetables a day, I don't think that should, clinically translate into goitrogenesis. There was a New England Journal of Medicine case report of an 88-year-old woman who was eating 1.5 kilograms. So that is around 3 to 4 pounds of raw bok choy a day because of, her diabetes, and she wanted to get her diabetes under control. So she went into severe hypothyroidism. But, most of us don't consume, pounds and pounds of cruciferous vegetables in their raw form.
Most people don't consume very many vegetables in general, let alone cruciferous.
That's right. Exactly. The amount of calories we get are the standard American diet. It's possibly, less than 16% of our calories actually come from healthy whole plant foods, right? And I think the data is that 1 in 10 Americans actually dies from the lack of vegetables every minute. 1 in 10 minutes, I'm sorry. 1 American dies every 10 minutes in our country from the lack of vegetables, which is scary if you think about it, how many people die from lack of vegetables in our country. So it's, I don't think we are at risk of acutely, toxifying our thyroid cells from cruciferous vegetables, unless if we are drinking gallons of kale smoothies in the raw form. If we are eating, like maybe up to 4 or 5 servings of cooked cruciferous vegetables a day, they are healthy and we should not worry about them impacting our thyroid function.
Great.
And gluten is something, gluten is a, sort of a Pandora's box. The literature is here and there. You can try going gluten-free if it helps you with your symptoms, if it helps you with joint pains, if it helps you with fatigue, if it helps you with, overall well-being, then maybe you are sensitive to gluten. And there is some, like the wheat, it's got like 60, 70 different kinds of protein. Gluten and gliadin are just one type, but there are also some other proteins that we might as an individual be sensitive to, even though we may not have celiac disease. So I think there is some literature that says people with autoimmune thyroid disease may have some type of gluten sensitivity and they may feel better if they go off of gluten. So you can try that. And if it works for you, then, you know that it's not something you should be ingesting regularly.
Great, thank you. Brenda, who's watching live, says, my dad and my sisters and I all have hypothyroidism. Is it likely that my son and daughter will also get it?
It is a little bit more likely than the rest of the population. So yes, there is a familial predilection. If somebody in our family has, the HLA, the human leukocyte antigen susceptibility to autoimmune thyroid, yes, we can inherit the same susceptibility, but it's not written in stone. If they do all the right things, if they are eating plant-based, if they are, watching other pillars of lifestyle medicine like stress and sleep and exercise, they do not need to inherit it for sure.
Right. So somebody who's watching live says 1 in 10 die in the US from lack of vegetables. What is your source?
I meant to say 1 American dies every 10 minutes. 1 American adult dies every 10 minutes in this country. The source is a paper from JAMA. I think it was 2018 or 2017. I can send you that study. It kind of talked about the dietary factors that are implicated in, premature mortality in the US. So I think, yeah, 1 American adult, I should say, dies every 10 minutes from the lack of adequate vegetables. And I think fruits is like 1 American dies every, 15, 20 minutes from the lack of eating adequate fruits.
Wow, I would love to see that. That's incredible.
I will definitely, because that was one of the studies that I had presented at that Connecticut Academy of Family Physicians Symposium. And this is exactly what somebody in the audience had mentioned that, how come we didn't know about this? Such studies, they don't see a lot of press, I guess.
I would love to see that because Dr. Furman, who might make a surprise appearance on my 2 p.m. show today, once said, if you don't like vegetables, you better live close to a hospital.
True that. I think you're right. True that. I mean, no matter how many advances we've made in science, but there are certain things like lack of vegetables, lack of sleep, lack of love. There are certain things that, no medication can overcome.
One thing I learned in your broadcast with Dr. A.J. Shah, and I think I've been taking my medication wrong I've been on thyroid medicine, I think since 2000, I can't remember when I went on, maybe 2014, but you said take it first thing in the morning on an empty stomach with water. And I drink pot liquor as my morning beverage. That's vegetable broth. Have I been screwing myself up by doing that?
Well, if your TSH is normal, then maybe not. If somebody is taking their thyroid medication, even with, let's say, milk, which is supposed to be rich in calcium, and calcium binds the thyroid in your gut before you can actually absorb it into your blood, then they will be needing a certain dose. So maybe instead of requiring 100 micrograms, your dose may be 112 or 125. It may be a little higher than what your body would otherwise have needed. But if you've been doing this forever, if you're consistent, then you will need a certain dose and your body will always reliably extract maybe 60% of it or 70% of it instead of 80%. Because levothyroxine, the most that we can do, the most efficient extractors will only be able to take 80% of that levothyroxine tablet into their blood. The remaining 20% will not be absorbed. And that's for people who absorb it efficiently and are not eating anything for at least 30 minutes. So if you've been doing that, you may be absorbing maybe 60%, maybe 70%. And, if your TSH is normal, you're good.
Yeah, things are good now. I don't want to change it because, it's funny because I did not want to go on medication. I took it as a personal failure, like as a vegan. But in my case, it was really vanity that got me to it because I developed a side effect. I don't know if you ever see this called lanugo, where I literally became a golden retriever. I was covered with blonde hair and I'm not blonde on my arms and my face. And I'm like, I got to get rid of this. And they said, well, here's one way because waxing hurts like heck.
So, like I said, it's, and I think we women, we tend to suffer from, this thing that everything is our fault and we feel like we're personal failures if something happens. But, I really don't want us to feel like it's like it's our fault. Like I said, there are other things like, environmental toxins and pollutants and EDCs. There's a lot that goes into our hormones. And it's not just as simple as our diet alone. It can be our sleep. It can be our stress. It can be so many other factors, relationship factors, and we don't have control over everything, right? So sometimes we need medications and that's okay. And that's not a sign of failure by any means, especially around menopause, like we women are so susceptible to so many things like depression, like thyroid disease, and so many other things can really unravel around menopause or pregnancy or so many other hormonal transitions that occur in our 40s or 30s. And so, hormonal issues are really common in women. Some of them need drugs, and that's not a sign of weakness of any kind. I mean, you are a light to, I don't know, millions of people. My son loves watching you. He is, always watching your grape sorbet or your
oh, that's adorable.
watermelon slushy. And I told him that I'm going to be on Chef AJ's show.
Oh my God. Is he there with you now?
He is not. He's at school.
Oh.
But, I think if you are a failure, then God bless the rest of us, right? So I think, sometimes we need drugs, and that is something in the plant-based world that we have to be, aware of. Sometimes things are more complicated than just our, good diet, and, no human being is 100% perfect. So it should not be a sign, our thing of our doing or our failure.
Yeah, thank you. People are asking about iodine in the thyroid.
So iodine is a very important element. Our thyroid hormones are actually made with iodine. Iodine is mostly richly concentrated in our thyroid gland in our body. And so lack of iodine can be a real big problem, especially for young kids, because that is actually associated with, neurological or cognitive disability or intellectual disability. So for pregnant women, for lactating women, for young kids, it's really important to get adequate dietary iodine. And the minimum that everybody, all adults should get is 150 micrograms in a day. But pregnant women need more like 220 micrograms in a day. And lactating women need 290. And there was a big Boston study that showed that vegans actually may have a true deficiency of iodine, because some of the vegans may not be doing iodized salt. And, some of, many of us, we don't do salt, right? So
that's my next question, because like you said, many people prefer, for whatever reason, the sea salt, Celtic sea salt or Himalayan, where there's no iodine. And there's a lot of people that just don't eat any salt. So how many sea vegetables a day should they be eating?
So this is, again, I think if you are really not going to do any salt whatsoever, or any iodized salt, I should say, sea vegetables is okay, but I would recommend that you take some multivitamin that has 150 micrograms of iodine a few times a week, maybe 3 or 4 times a week. I would not rely solely on sea vegetables. The reason is that we don't know exactly how much iodine. I think the iodine intake from these can be very unreliable. It depends on, how they are cultured or how they are, harvested, etc. And the other thing I sometimes worry about from sea vegetables is there any risk for heavy metal poisoning? Like hijiki is supposed to have a lot of arsenic. Although I don't think that should be true with like standard vegetables like nori. Nori should be perfectly safe if you're consuming it 2 or 3 times a week. Would I say do sea vegetables daily? I don't know. I'm not sure if I want to recommend that. So if you're not going to do any iodized salt whatsoever, then please take a multivitamin. I never recommend iodine supplements, a single nutrient supplement. You should not take iodine supplements. That's problematic. But you can take a multivitamin with 150 micrograms of iodine, maybe a few times a week. And if you're pregnant, you should take a prenatal with 150 micrograms of iodine daily. That should be once a day at least. If you want to, if you are healthy, if you don't have hypertension, you could potentially take half a teaspoon or 1/4 teaspoon of iodized salt. The amount of sodium from that would be very limited. It should perhaps not impact your health. If you think that may be something you would be willing to consider. If not, then multivitamin.
Great. Is everyone in your family plant-based?
They are now. Although, I let my children once in a while, if they go to a birthday party, they do eat cheese pizza, they do eat cake. And, I don't really belabor that. I think it's okay if they do.
They get a stomach ache, hopefully.
You know what? My son does get a lot of cramps from cheese pizza, my older son, the one who watches you. And so I don't know. I think at some point of time, I think he'll come around. When he watched the Rice Stand 6 Code Blue, he really came around, and he has not eaten meat since. So he's, conscientious boy, and he's, he understands the part about animal suffering. And, sometimes I let them eat the cheese pizza, but in general, most of the time we are plant-based. And my husband and I are, really almost 95, 99% plant-based. Very rarely, once in a blue moon, if we are eating out, would we eat something that has dairy in it, and meat's almost never.
Great. Do you like to cook?
I do. I love to cook. I love watching your show, and I show actually my patients. We do these lifestyle classes, like the lifestyle clinic that I said, and our last video was your calorie density video, the one with all the jars. Your hands are not enough to hold all the jars. So yes, I love to cook. It's something that I didn't always grow up with, but when I came to the US, I realized I had to cook in order to be able to survive and to be able to thrive. So now I enjoy doing that. And my friends like Dr. Nathan and Dr. Parisetti, they all, we all have like this group where we share our recipes. Dr. Potlery, who's been on your show, Dr.
She's a wonderful chef.
I do a lot of her recipes, and then Dr. Raipuri, who's, Gift of Health, her website is amazing. They have some wonderful recipes that I use all the time. So yeah, we do all the recipes from Jane Eselstyn, from you, from everybody. And my son and I, we love to cook together.
Do you guys have an Instant Pot?
We have 2.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Gift of Health. They're going to be on the show this week. And there's a couple of the lifestyle medicine doctors this week, I think, that are actually going to do a demonstration of a recipe as part of their appearance. So that'll be amazing.
That will be amazing. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. I see a question from Pat. I did basal temperature armpit and had 97.6, a hypothyroid condition. Yet my blood tests say I do not. My hair falls and has always been thin. I'm 68 and my hair is now transparent. What can I do for this? I'd say see an endocrinologist like yourself. Do you ever do telemedicine, or do people have to find hopefully a plant-based lifestyle medicine endocrinologist near them?
They may have to find somebody locally in their state, because right now that the licensing laws prevent me from being able to give care to somebody who's outside the state of Connecticut where I practice. Hopefully, with the advent of telehealth, once the Center for the CMS, once they have like more demand for telehealth, I think, hopefully doctors will be able to practice across state boundaries. Right now, I do telehealth within different parts of the state of Connecticut, but not outside of the boundaries because I'm not licensed. But they can definitely go on plantbaseddoctors.org and find a local endocrinologist. And some of these, the things that they are mentioning, like feeling cold or hair loss, etc., they might have some micronutrient deficiencies like iron deficiency or zinc deficiency, or even vitamin D deficiency, etc. So they really should get comprehensively evaluated, like you said.
Nice. What's your favorite thing to cook?
A lot of them, actually. I love cooking desserts. I love making these energy bites. I love, making sweet potato based desserts, sweet potato chocolate mousse, etc. And then in terms of entrees, I love making saag, which is a North Indian version of green leafies, made with a lot of, like curry spices, lots of aromatic Indian spices, and then they are all pureed in a blender to make a fine curry, like a blended green leafy curry. And you can add a lot of protein to that, like tofu or tempeh or mushrooms, etc. So I love saag. I love a lot of, curries in general. I love making, I guess I'm talking too much, but yeah, a lot of, vegetables that can be sort of ground into, or, processed into like sort of a ball, kofta, which can be grilled. So yeah.
That sounds great. Well, maybe you'll come back and do a cooking demo with your son.
Yes, that's exactly. My son said, "Oh, I can hold the iPhone if you want me to." I said, "No, go be at your school." And
That
maybe
would be fantastic. Natalia says my TSH numbers are hypothyroidism, but my T3 and T4 are normal. What is more important?
So TSH is the number one indicator. If the TSH is abnormal, they should see their primary care physician. Even if their T4 and T3 are not yet abnormal, the TSH being abnormal suggests that there is a problem that they need to address.
Nice. That's great. Well, Scott, you're wonderful. Thank you so much. So where would people have to live to see you if they wanted you to be their endocrinologist? Or it sounds like you can be their internal medicine doctor as well, or their lifestyle medicine doctor.
Yes, I practice in the state of Connecticut, and patients from anywhere in the state of Connecticut can see me either virtually or physically if they're located close to my location. And I accept new patients. So please feel free to call my office. You can look me up online. I am on plantbaseddoctors.org. I'm also on Twitter. So yes, if you're in the state of Connecticut, I'm very happy to be your doctor.
I put it in the show notes, your Twitter, and I'll put it in the chat right now. I'm not as big on Twitter, but I don't really get Twitter though. That's an interesting platform. Well, it was just wonderful getting to know you. Thank you so much. You're so knowledgeable, and I thank you so much for being plant-based and lifestyle medicine. That's fabulous.
Thank you so much for having me. You are really wonderful. You are doing such incredible work. And
well, I'm trying to shine the light on people like you that are doing incredible work that not everybody knows about. And that's my goal, is to every person that's doing something good in the world, especially if they're a plant eater, I want them on the show, because you never know who's going to see this and be helped by this.
Exactly. You never know where, somebody might just chance, have like this sort of.
I'm so excited because I get to meet 9 new doctors this week that I wouldn't have known. And it's so funny because the doctor that spearheaded this, it wasn't available at the last minute. So now we have to get Dr. Patel on as well. The other Dr. Patel. There's so many, I guess Patel is a really common name. I don't know if you heard that story where I had a Dr. Patel book and I didn't write the first name. And I was like contacting like 50 doctors. Are you the one on the show? Apparently that's a very common Indian name. Did not know that. So now
there is actually, there was a joke when I was training in New York City as an intern. somebody paged Dr. Patel overhead, and it was like, okay, Dr. Patel is needed at this floor, and everybody's like, what do they mean, Dr. Patel? It was just a mayhem because, nobody knew which Dr. Patel was being paged overhead. Yes, it is a very common name.
I did not know that. I learned now to always write the first name of every speaker, but it turns out that Dr. Patel that was on the show is also a plant-based endocrinologist.
He is. I know him very well. Yes.
Yeah. Well, so you're my
I know all the plant-based endocrinologists, I guess, in the country, because there's I guess we started networking, just about a few years ago, because it's a small family. So I guess we all know each other and network with each other.
Yeah, he had a wonderful story about how he really had to get off dairy to see improvement.
Yes, I have heard that story. Yes.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for the work you do. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back in a couple of hours. I have a bonus show today with Talia Furman. She's the daughter of Dr. Joel Furman, and she has written a new cookbook called Desserts to Live For. And she's going to be making a wonderful recipe called goji berry brownies. And there is a chance for a surprise guest. You can probably guess who that might be. Thank you so much, Dr. Gulati. It was such a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you so much, Chef AJ, for having me. The pleasure is all mine. The honor is mine. Thank you.
Tell your son we must like him to come on the show and do something for us.
That would be lovely. I'm sure he's going to love that.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.